Before Fukushima, in fact, decades before Fukushima, some of the greatest actors and actresses and performers of our time may have died because of their exposure to atmospheric testing or their proximity to the Rocketdyne plant. And as one example will show, this even extends to their children. One of the most famous and talked about examples of this is the movie The Conqueror, which was a 1956 film produced by Howard Hughes, starring John Wayne as the Mongol conqueror Genghis Khan. Other performers included Susan Hayward, Agnes Moorehead, and Pedro Armendariz. The picture was directed by actor and director Dick Powell, and the film was principally shot near St. George, Utah. There was a huge cancer controversy following this film. The exterior scenes were shot on location near St. George, which was 137 miles downwind of the United States government's Nevada test site. In 1953, extensive above-ground nuclear weapons testing occurred at the test site as part of Operation Upshot Knothole. The cast and crew spent many difficult weeks on location, and in addition, Hughes later shipped 60 tons of radioactive dirt back to Hollywood to reshoot scenes. The filmmakers knew about the nuclear tests, and there were even publicity photographs of Wayne holding a Geiger counter during production, but the link between the exposure to radioactive fallout and cancer was poorly understood then. Now, Powell died of cancer in January of 1963, only a few years after the picture's completion. Pedro Armendariz was diagnosed with kidney cancer in 1960, and he committed suicide in 1963 when he learned it was terminal. Hayward, Wayne, and Moorehead all died of cancer in the mid to late 1970s. Cast member John Hoyt died of lung cancer in 1991. The skeptics had also pointed to other factors such as the wide use of tobacco. Of course, there we get into the multiplier effect, and the notion that cancer resulting from radiation exposure does not have such a long incubation period. The cast and crew totaled 220 people. By 1981, 91 of them had developed some form of cancer and 46 had died. Dr. Robert Pendleton, professor of biology at the University of Utah, stated, "With these numbers, this case could only qualify as an epidemic. The connection between fallout radiation and cancer in individual cases has been practically impossible to prove conclusively, but in a group this size, you'd only expect some 30 cancers to develop." I think the tie-in to their exposure on the set of The Conqueror would hold up in a court of law.
Absolutely it would. Except that radiation lawsuits are very, very, very difficult to prove. One person, Dr. Chris Busby, has won almost every, I think he's won every lawsuit that he was an expert witness in. And he was able to do it because he's British. He's not American. He was an expert witness here in the U.S. on the Simi Valley nuclear disaster in Los Angeles, and he won that lawsuit. Rocketdyne had a facility there in Simi Valley, which is in the northern part of L.A., and they were operating an experimental or a research reactor because they were developing X-ray lasers for space weapons. Now, he went to Los Angeles for the law firm representing maybe 35 or 40 children. The parents had filed this lawsuit who had extremely rare cancers or died of very rare cancers. And the parents wanted to, they knew it was Rocketdyne. They wanted their day in court. And Chris finally tested the groundwater and discovered that there were very fresh, very short half-life fission products in the groundwater, the drinking water, which means that The reactor had to be operational at the time that he took the samples, because some of the short half-lives are hours or minutes or days, whatever. And when he got the results back, and there were fresh fishing products in the groundwater, he went straight to the law firm and gave them the data and explained what it meant, interpreted it for them. They took it to the defendant's law firm, the one representing Rocketdyne, and Rocketdyne immediately quietly settled out of court. They didn't want a court judgment or a precedent set, and they paid $250 million to those plaintiffs. Nobody's ever heard of that out of court, because every single person in Los Angeles has been exposed to Rocketdyne fission products, and everyone in LA could sue Rocketdyne if they knew. So that had two meltdowns. There was one in 1963, and an earlier one, I believe it was 1957. And I believe that 1957 was the first meltdown in the United States of a nuclear reactor.
Yes, and the one that happened a few years later that I found in an interview with a former worker at the site, she indicated that the second incident, they had lost 80% of the cladding on the fuel rods during that meltdown, and no one was ever even told about that accident.
I know. I know a woman who is a secretary for G. Edward Griffin, who is, he writes books. He wrote the Creature of Jekyll Island on the Federal Reserve. And she contacted me because she said, I have cancer of the eye, and I used to jog on the public pathways around the Santa Susana site that Rocketdyne was, where they were operating this research reactor. And I said, well, you were exposed to fission products while you were out there jogging. And I don't know whether she's completely lost her eye yet or not, but she's still trying to file a lawsuit. Now, so I put her in touch with Dr. Busby. That reactor, all reactors in the United States have to be licensed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The predecessor was the Atomic Energy Commission. It's now the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And you can't operate a nuclear reactor in the United States without an NRC license to operate. That the NRC had revoked the Rocketdyne license to operate that reactor 10 years before he took that water sample and discovered the fission products in it. So they were not only operating a nuclear reactor in a heavily populated urban area, but they were also illegally operating a nuclear reactor for 10 years, and they were never caught.